everyone, 1.9 trophic levels. We're working our way through the end of this Unit 1 of the AP Environmental Science curriculum. This is another easy one. This is something you've probably learned before, but I just want to make sure I go through it in just some detail so that you get a thorough understanding and so that I know I've checked off all those boxes to make sure that you are fully prepared for that AP exam. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Standards associated with trophic levels, make sure you can explain. So we're not just talking about simple stuff here, we're actually talking about an in-depth knowledge, how energy flows and matter flows through an ecosystem. It makes a ton of sense. It's just really talking about how organisms are going to be consumed and who does the consuming. So here we go. Without further ado, trophic levels. What is a trophic level? A trophic level is referring to the predominant foraging level of an organism. This is what type of foods it predominantly consumes, and where does that fall on a food chain, food web system. Now, this concept works in collaborations with food chains and food webs, and we're going to continue that in a section or two. So we're going to make sure we fully understand all of those little details associated with structure of an ecosystem from an organismal standpoint. Now, the one thing we need to make sure we understand is that most ecosystems, more than 95% of all ecosystems, are based off of incoming solar energy from the sun. Okay? Energy is coming in from the sun. It radiates 93 million miles to the Earth. It then is converted into biomass through the process of photosynthesis. Now, that small little fraction of ecosystems that do not utilize this solar energy, what are they going to be using for their energy generation or their food generation? Chemosynthesis. So though that small little percentage of the Earth that is not going through solar radiation and photosynthesis are going to be using chemosynthesis, areas like inside the Earth's crust, where you have archaea bacteria which are synthesizing it. You can talk about black smokers at the bottom of the open oceans, where you have hydrothermal vent communities pushing out rich, sulfur-rich, very, very hot water, nutrient-rich water, and they're able to convert it. Extreme environments like Yellowstone with the thermal pools, where you have archaea bacteria again. Now, are they as productive as photosynthesis? No. But are they able to survive and produce? Yes. So let's start with the sun. Again, travels 93 million miles to the Earth as visible light, among other different types of radiation, ultraviolet radiation, infrared radiation. All of that is coming into the Earth. Then, the first organisms that we're going to learn about today are called producers. Why are they called producers? Because they produce the first biomass to start any food chain or food web. What they are able to do is they are able to take in solar energy. They are able to go through the process of photosynthesis and generate biomass from it. Now, again, remember the previous lesson, we talked about productivity. We talked about the idea that certain organisms and certain ecosystems are going to be more productive than others. They're able to convert more solar energy to biomass, or they're able to generate more biomass per square meter per year, per annum, than other ecosystems. So depending on where you are and what those other limiting reactants are, it's going to determine how productive an ecosystem is and how much the producers can actually produce. Now, for the most part, what is happening is these plants are taking in solar energy, they're producing glucose. We talked about this way back when we talked about the carbon cycle. The very simple fact there is that your carbon fixation, you're taking in small carbon atoms, and then what you're going to do is you're going to join them together into much larger polysaccharide molecules, things like cellulose or starch, which are then going to be used for large structure building. So I know I say large structure building, but they're still microscopic level. Cell walls, for example, a tree that can get to be over 100 feet tall is really just based on a bunch of cell walls all working together. So it's actually incredibly interesting to think about in that regard. But all of that matter that has made that tree started from solar energy and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we have the ability to take all this stuff in and convert it into large amounts of matter. Now, other organisms are going to come along. Other organisms are going to consume these producers. And that's where we get the idea of consumers. Now, there's many different levels of consumers depending on what they consume. If you start at the very, very basis, an organism that consumes a producer is going to be a primary consumer. And then if that organism consumes primary consumers, it's a secondary consumer. So let's go through some very, very simple examples here. We have solar energy coming into our plant here in this example. This is our producer. So the plant is our producer. Humans are not producers. Even though you may think you're a producer because you're a farmer, you are not going through the process of photosynthesis yourself. You, if you are a vegetarian, means you consume only producers. So that actually means that you are a primary consumer. If you want to think about how your body could be determined to be a producer, think about if you could stick your arm outside while you're driving your car in the sunlight, and all of a sudden you start to feel full in your belly, because what your body would be doing is converting solar energy into glucose. It doesn't happen that way. Nobody goes to the beach and gets really fat just because they're laying in the sun all day. It'd be a very interesting world to live in. Maybe I'll make a little sci-fi novel about it, but I digress. Let's get back to the idea of this simple trophic level arrangement. Producers consumed in this situation by some sort of herbivore, or in this situation, it looks like a grub or a beetle or a caterpillar or something like that. It's going to eat the leaves. So it is consuming. This is our primary consumer. Now that beetle, grub, larva, whatever it is going to be consumed by maybe a bird, a small bird. Okay, so this small bird, since it's eating an insect, we can be really specific and call it insectivorous. All right. But since it consumes that primary consumer, it is now a secondary consumer. And then you can go up if that bird is consumed by something else, maybe a hawk or a snake or something like that. This would be what we consider a tertiary consumer. And it can actually go on to quaternary and the 5th level, 6th level, 7th level, 8th level, as many levels as you want. But there becomes less and less available energy every level you go up. And we're going to talk about that in a subsequent lesson. Now, how do aquatic food chains or aquatic consumers compare to terrestrial consumers? Well, here's the thing. They both start with producers. On land, we have all of our flora, all of our plants, grasses, trees, bushes, flowers. All of those are taking in solar energy and they're converting it to biomass. Then you have consumers that will consume from there. In the waters or oceans or any aquatic ecosystem, you still start with solar energy. The organisms that are taking in solar energy in an aquatic ecosystem are phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are the basis of the aquatic food chain. And then phytoplankton are going to be consumed by zooplankton. Zooplankton are going to be consumed by the bigger fish and whatnot, and it works its way up. I will tell you this. When we talk about the number of level of consumer in a terrestrial ecosystem, it's very, very rare to go above 4 or 5 on the trophic level scale. Right? In the oceans, it's far more common to see things up to like the 8th, 9th, or even 10th level, just because there's a lot of organisms that have specialized and they work their way up the food chains very, very rapidly. One thing I have not mentioned yet deals with what happens at the end. Well, if a plant is not consumed by a primary consumer but dies off, or a primary consumer dies and is not consumed by a secondary consumer, or quaternary consumer dies and nothing really eats it, well, the nutrients need to be broken down. The nutrients are going to be broken down through decomposers. Decomposers don't fall into the hierarchy of trophic levels, but they are just kind of like the catch-all. Every single organism, when it dies or its waste or everything, will eventually go to a decomposer. So it's really important to understand that decomposers are breaking down the materials found in ecosystems, and they help to continually cycle nutrients around. Some of the most famous types of decomposers are going to be bacteria and mushrooms. Okay, so mushrooms are not photosynthetic. They're technically consumers because they are consuming nutrients from other organisms, but they're decomposers. They're breaking things down to release them back into the nutrients back into the environment. And that concludes the idea of trophic levels. If at the end of this lesson you feel really comfortable, you know the difference between a producer and a consumer, and you also know how to identify the different levels of consumers, then you are in great shape. If you understand why we have decomposers on the planet and why nutrients must be, or why organisms must go through decomposers to release those nutrients, you are in great shape. If again, you don't necessarily know what's all going on and you maybe just want to talk, feel free, shoot me an email. I'll gladly help you out. If not, I look forward to seeing you at the next lesson. Have a great one.
You like that lesson? I know you did. So why don't you go ahead and smash that like button right now. Go ahead and comment. Tell all your friends about how great that lesson was. And make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to keep bringing you AP environmental content that you're going to want to watch. Or do whatever else those other YouTube channels tell you to do. And with that, Maloney.